If your nights are too quiet, fix that right now. Hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with the prison you want covered next. Because this story doesn't start with a courtroom, it starts with 3 empty beds on an island where nobody was supposed to disappear. The morning air over San Francisco Bay is thin and metallic, the kind that stings the lungs before the sun warms anything. Inside Alcatraz, the cell house wakes the same way it always does. Counts, footsteps, the slow rattle of routine. Then a detail lands wrong. A head on a pillow doesn't move. A face looks real until it doesn't. In seconds, the illusion collapses. The bed holds a dummy, not a man. 2 more cells confirm it. Frank Morris is gone. John Anglin is gone. Clarence Anglin is gone. The Rock, the prison sold to the public as escape-proof, has been embarrassed in silence. That single vanishing act is why Alcatraz sits on this list, not just as a prison, but as a legend with an ending nobody can lock down. The men behind it had been ordinary criminals turned patient planners, and the bay outside the walls was a moving threat. Cold water, currents, open distance. The official file ran for years. The case didn't end with handcuffs or a body. It ended with uncertainty and a warrant that never really goes away. But Alcatraz is only one name in a gallery of places that became famous for a different reason. They didn't just hold people, they changed the world around them. Number 10. San Quentin, California, USA. On paper, San Quentin is California's oldest prison, opened in the 1850s, sitting close enough to the bay that the air can feel damp even behind concrete. In real life, its reputation became bigger than the buildings, an American symbol of punishment, fear, and the finality of a sentence that can't be appealed by time. Generations of men learned the same lesson in different decades. Inside famous prisons, your identity becomes a number, your days become a schedule, and your future becomes a narrow hallway with rules you learn before you learn anyone's name. Number 8. ADX Florence, Colorado, USA. If Alcatraz was the myth of inescapable, ADX Florence is the modern version of Control, built for the idea that some people are too dangerous to be around anyone else. It opened in the mid-1990s, far from tourist boats and city skylines, placed in a landscape that feels deliberately empty. The fame here isn't romance or history, it's the concept, a prison designed to reduce movement, reduce contact, reduce life into a smaller and smaller space until the world outside becomes something the mind has to remember rather than see. Number 8. Alcatraz, California, USA. Alcatraz operated as a federal prison from the 1930s to the early 1960s, and it marketed itself with a simple promise: you can't outrun water. The men who lived there became characters in an American cautionary tale, isolated, watched, managed by routine. Then Morris and the Anglins turned routine into a blind spot, and the prison's fame became permanent. Even decades later, the official position stayed cautious. Most likely the Bay won, but because nothing final ever surfaced, the story stayed open in the public imagination. From the United States, the list crosses the Atlantic, where famous prison doesn't mean razor wire and modern locks, it means stone, monarchy, and history that still feels alive in the walls. Number 7. The Tower of London. The Tower is remembered because it held the most prisoners. It's remembered because it held the right ones, people with names that still echo through textbooks. In 1536, Anne Boleyn was held there, and on May 19th of that year, she was executed within the Tower's world of court politics and controlled fear. In that place, prison wasn't just a sentence, it was a pause before history decided whether you'd be remembered as guilty, innocent, or inconvenient. The stone corridors didn't need modern cameras. Power watched from everywhere. Number 6. The Bastille. Paris in July 1789 is heat and hunger and rumor, streets pressed tight with people who believe the old order is about to crush them. The Bastille stands as a fortress and a state prison, and in the public mind it becomes more than its prisoners. It becomes a symbol of secrecy, of royal authority, of a government that can erase you behind walls. On July 14th, the crowd storms it. The act is violent, chaotic, unforgettable, and it becomes a signal flare for the French Revolution. Here, a prison isn't just a place where people are held, it's a place that can trigger a nation to break apart and rebuild itself. By now, the pattern is clear. Each prison on this list becomes famous for a different kind of power. Some are famous because they represent escape, some because they represent control, some because they represent a society turning on itself. And then the list turns darker, because the next prisons aren't famous for legends or symbols. They're famous for what the world later learned, too late, about what happened inside. Decades after Alcatraz, the story resurfaces in an unexpected way. A letter appears, allegedly from one of the escapees, claiming they lived, barely, and asking for a deal. The results, authorities say, are inconclusive. The mystery stays alive because doubt is fuel. And as that unresolved American legend lingers, another set of doors opens in a different part of the world. January 11th, 2002, a new detention site begins receiving prisoners at Guantanamo Bay. The first arrivals step into a place that will become globally infamous, not for an escape, but for a debate that never truly ends. What counts as justice? What counts as law? And what happens when a prison is designed to exist outside the normal rhythm of time?
The first arrivals at Guantanamo Bay did not step into a single building so much as into a system, an outpost built to feel permanent even when everyone insisted it was temporary. On January 11, 2002, the first detainees were taken to the early compound known as Camp X-Ray, a place of chain link, floodlights, and tropical air that never cooled the mind. There were no familiar city sounds, no traffic, no neighbors, no ordinary horizon. Only the constant hum of a base designed to keep distance between the world and whoever was held inside it. The days formed a loop: bright mornings, slow afternoons, nights that arrived suddenly, the same fences repeating in every direction, as if the geography itself was refusing escape. This is what modern famous prisons look like: less stone and iron, more procedure and isolation. Guantanamo's notoriety grew because it sat at the crossroads of fear and law, where time stretched without the usual endpoints. At its peak in the early 2000s, hundreds of detainees were held there, and the place became a global argument that never fully ended. Even years later, when the population dropped to 15 men after transfers in January 2025, the name still carried the same weight. Less about numbers than what the facility symbolized to the outside world. But if Guantanamo is the prison of debates and definitions, the next places on the list are prisons of memory, sites where history's darkest chapters still cling to the walls. Number 5. Devil's Island, French Guiana. Far from Paris, beyond the comfort of European attention, the penal colony known as Devil's Island became famous for what it did to time. The air was heavy, the sea uninviting, and the distance from home felt like an extra sentence layered on top of the official one. Devil's Island operated as part of France's penal colony system for roughly a century, a reputation so grim that even its nickname sounded final. In April 1995, French Army Captain Alfred Dreyfus entered that penal colony after his conviction in the scandal that would tear French society into bitter factions. On the island, his life narrowed into the basics: the weather, the confinement, the long wait for the world to decide whether it had made a mistake. The Dreyfus Affair became a national crisis, not because Devil's Island was unique, but because the distance made it feel like banishment, a way to make a person disappear while insisting everything was lawful. Number 4. Robben Island, South Africa. Robben Island is surrounded by water too, but its fame is not built on escape stories, it's built on endurance. The island served multiple uses over centuries, but its modern meaning comes from its era as a prison for political prisoners under apartheid, an architecture of control that tried to shrink big ideas into small cells. Nelson Mandela spent 18 years on Robben Island, years that became a kind of measure, counted and recounted until the number itself carried moral force. The daily life was repetitive by design: hard routines, limited contact, the slow grind of a system that believed time could wear conviction down. Yet the island eventually transformed into the opposite of what it was meant to be. UNESCO describes the site as a witness to the triumph of democracy and freedom over oppression, proof that prisons can hold bodies, but not always outcomes. Number 3. Tuol Sleng, S21, Cambodia. Some prisons become famous because they held the powerful. Others become famous because they swallowed the ordinary. In Phnom Penh, the buildings of Tuol Sleng began as a school. Under the Khmer Rouge, it became Security Prison 21, S21, and the normal logic of daily life was replaced by a machinery of fear. Between 14,000 and 17,000 prisoners were detained there, according to the U.S. Holocaust Museum Memorial. The environment itself tells the story. Former classrooms converted into small cells, windows blocked, corridors turned into channels where a person's world could shrink down to a few steps. The people brought to S21 were often not criminals in any ordinary sense. Many were swept up as alleged enemies, accused by association, rumor, or the shifting paranoia of a regime trying to control reality through confession. The days inside were built around pressure and paperwork, names, photographs, lists, forced statements, until identity became a document that could be rewritten and then filed away. In July 2025, UNESCO recognized Tuol Sleng as part of a set of Cambodian memorial sites, places meant for peace and reflection after once being places of repression. AP News. The fame here isn't cinematic, it is archival. It is the world acknowledging that a building can become evidence. Number 2. Abu Ghraib, Iraq. A prison whose fame is not anchored to a single day, but to a long era of uncertainty. Guantanamo's daily reality was built on separation, distance from courts, distance from home, distance from public view. Over time, the name became shorthand in Western media and global politics for a question that never has one clean answer. What does a society do when it's afraid, and how long can temporary last before it becomes a structure of its own? In famous prisons, the world outside is always present, sometimes as revolution, sometimes as scandal, sometimes as slow pressure that eventually forces change. The walls are never just walls. They are mirrors, showing what a nation fears, what it hides, and what it is willing to justify. And now, the countdown reaches its most dangerous point, not in riot sirens or escape attempts, but in a single date that turns secrecy into a broadcast. Because on the night of April 28, 2004, the world was about to watch images from Abu Ghraib, pictures that would make millions of people feel like the prison doors had opened in their living rooms, and once those images were out, there would be no way to lock them back inside.
The night the Abu Ghraib images went public, distance stopped working. For months, the prison outside Baghdad had been a name most people in the West barely registered, another hard noun in a war full of hard nouns. Then April 28, 2004 arrived, and photographs aired on CBS's 60 Minutes 2 showed detainees being abused and humiliated inside the walls. The pictures did what walls are built to prevent. They carried the inside to the outside instantly and made it impossible to pretend the suffering was only rumor. In the hours after the broadcast, the world's attention did what it always does when it sees proof. First, disbelief, then anger, then a hunger to understand how something like that could happen in a place that wasn't supposed to exist in darkness. Abu Ghraib didn't become famous the way Alcatraz did. There were no mythic escape routes, no cinematic fog over water, no romanticized outlaw story. Its notoriety was blunt, immediate, and humiliating in a way that could not be rebranded. A prison can outlast a scandal. What it cannot outlast is an image that millions of people have already filed into memory. And that is the pivot point of this list, the moment the famous prison stops being only a historical site, a cautionary tale, or a tourist destination. It becomes a live wire. It becomes a reminder that confinement is never just architecture. It is a decision repeated every day about what a society will allow when it believes fear justifies it.
In the same era, Guantanamo Bay was already beginning to harden into permanence. The first detainees had arrived on January 11, 2002, taken into a temporary compound known as Camp X-Ray, a place of chain-link pens and lights designed to erase shadows. Even as the camp evolved, the logic stayed the same: isolation, separation, and a legal ambiguity that made time feel elastic. It wasn't the kind of prison built to become a museum. It was built to keep the present tense going as long as needed. To the men held there, daily life became a narrow corridor of sameness, heat, routine, waiting. To the outside world, Guantanamo became something else, a symbol with no single closing date. Each year that passed without a clean ending turned the place into a warning about how easily temporary can become normal if the language is careful and the location is far enough away. Famous prisons always do this in their own way. They start as solutions and end as stories, sometimes stories of power, sometimes stories of regret. Robben Island's story is built on endurance. A person could stand on its shoreline and see Cape Town across the water, close enough to feel real, far enough to be cruel. For 18 years, Nelson Mandela lived inside that distance, his days reduced to routine and restriction. Yet the world outside kept changing, slowly, until the prison's purpose began to collapse under the weight of history. In time, the island's fame flipped from a tool of oppression into a global monument to what oppression fails to destroy. Devil's Island is remembered for banishment, the feeling that exile is a form of disappearance. When Alfred Dreyfus was sent there in 1895, the physical reality of the place did half the work of punishment: remoteness, harshness, the sense that the world could move on without you. Decades later, the Dreyfus Affair would be taught as a national wound, proof that institutions can be loud and wrong at the same time, and that a prison can be used as a seal over a mistake. Tuol Sleng in Phnom Penh is remembered for something even colder: how normal spaces can be repurposed into machinery. A school became S21, and the daily environment, corridors, rooms, barred windows, absorbed a new function. Years later, the world's recognition arrived not as fascination, but as memorialization. UNESCO inscribed Cambodian memorial sites, including the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum, in July 2025, a formal reminder that some buildings survive as evidence of what humans can do when fear becomes policy. And then there are the prisons whose fame never resolves into justice or closure, only into questions that refuse to die. Alcatraz is the cleanest example. In the American imagination, it remains the perfect stage, a fortress on an island, water like a moat, a narrative that promises consequence. Yet the Great Escape did not end like a story is supposed to. On June 12, 1962, a routine bed check discovered dummy heads in the beds of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, and the prison realized it had been tricked. After that, history split into two possibilities: the Bay took them, or it didn't. The certainty people want, the body, the confession, the final scene, never arrived. That uncertainty has fed the legend for decades. In 2013, a letter surfaced that was claimed to be from John Anglin, suggesting the men survived and offering a deal in exchange for surrender. Authorities tested it, but the results were inconclusive, and the story remained unconfirmed. The details mattered less than what the letter represented: the idea that a prison designed to end a person's options might have failed, and that the world might never get to know how. This is the haunting truth behind every prison on this list. Their fame is never only about crime, it's about what people become when the world narrows. Some prisons become cautionary tales wrapped in stone, like the Bastille, which fell on July 14, 1789, when a crowd stormed it and turned a fortress into a symbol of a collapsing order. Others become stages where power performs, like the Tower of London, remembered for political imprisonment and for the execution of Anne Boleyn on May 15, 1936, when a monarchy's private decisions became public history.
But modern fame is instantaneous. It arrives through cameras, broadcasts, leaks, and images that cannot be unseen. That is why the Abu Ghraib photographs land like the climax of this story, even though they were never meant to be a story at all. When they surfaced, they not just damaged a prison's reputation, they changed how the world talked about detention. They forced an uncomfortable question into the open. If a prison exists away from public view, what exactly is protecting the people inside it, the walls or the silence? And then the last twist, the one that makes this list linger long after the credits. Some of these places are now museums, some are World Heritage Sites, some are monuments to freedom or warnings carved into preserved hallways. Yet other prisons remain active, sealed, and routine, operating in the present tense beyond the reach of tourists and history plaques. Time doesn't erase the need for accountability, it only changes the lighting. The famous prisons of the world are not famous because they are unique buildings. They are famous because they reveal what societies do to people when fear becomes a system, and because once the world sees it, the world can never fully forget it. And somewhere in the background, across cold water, a question still hangs over an empty bed on Alcatraz. If 3 men really did vanish into the night, what else have famous prisons failed to contain? If you thought this one was heavy, the next story goes even deeper, so subscribe now, because the darkest places on Earth don't stay quiet for long.